Dallas Goslin, Rhetorical Criticism, CPD, Spring 2020, National Geographic, and Atonement Rhetoric. What if I told you that all the information you'd been getting was inaccurate? Maybe more importantly, how would you feel if your culture and society had been portrayed to be underdeveloped or inadequate? This is exactly how many cultures had been portrayed by National Geographic throughout history, as told by National Geographic Editor-in-Chief Susan Goldberg. Let's build this rhetorical act up just a little bit more and give you some background. In a historic issue titled The Race Issue, National Geographic released a rhetorically abundant atonement article which has a culturally significant date, the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. In this issue, a preamble written by Susan Goldberg addressed the exigence of showing foreign cultures in a racist lens. With this, we can see obvious rhetorical constraints and advantages at the time. For instance, a liberating factor could be the kairos surrounding the dates that are significant, being in that certain area, and, everybody's ready for a change. Quite possibly the attitude towards change at the time could be exhibited through the issue and could be considered as well. Another possibility would be the editor. Susan is National Geographic's first female and first Jewish editor, according to National Public Radio. Some constraints that we could look at would be the value people put into National Geographic during this time of racist coverage, how they were widely accepted as the primary source of information about these cultures. Certain superstitions can also arise that could be a limiting factor. These could be done out of maybe the thought of a political move or for political gain. But more importantly, Nat Geo tried to reach out to its subscribers and told them to try and band together at this time, that we need to come together and realize that there's something a bit more important. Quote unquote, see what's working when it comes to race and what isn't, Nat Geo said. This paper has hopes to analyze the effectiveness of atonement rhetoric in the race issue for National Geographic by looking at Costin and Rowland's rhetoric of atonement. Lastly, we're going to draw implications from all of this and see how it could be applied more broadly. So, once again, we're going to take Rowland and Costin's rhetoric of atonement, and we're going to analyze the effectiveness of Nat Geo's atonement in order to see if we can draw implications that can make broad categories all over this. Now, let's get started in the method. In order to gauge the effectiveness of this rhetorical act, we need to find a proper theory that we can build upon. In order for this, we will be looking at Joy Costin and Robert C. Rowland's Spring 2004 Quarterly Journal of Communication Studies article, The Rhetoric of Atonement. In this, Costin and Rowland have a deeply religious-based atonement theory. This is based upon Rowland's previous experience with Catholic school. More importantly, this also ties in to several Jewish traditions and indeed some Muslim traditions. They base their characteristics on 5 principles of atonement. The first is acknowledge wrongdoing and ask for forgiveness. The second, based upon reflection, offer a thorough change of attitude and relationship. Third, take steps to develop a different kind of present and a future, change what we're currently in. Fourth, through public action or private mortification, demonstrate the authenticity of the apology. And last, we need to seek atonement in a public forum. This article was chosen to be analyzed as our main theory because of the fact that the article provided in the class was analyzed through a sports lens. When reading through this, I thought that it would be a little bit smarter to use something that was maybe applied on a political scale. For instance, in this Rowland article, they analyzed Clinton's apologies or his atonement rhetoric for the Tuskegee syphilis incident and his Monica Lewinsky atonement speeches. This gives me reason to believe that if used properly at the highest levels of government, then it could possibly translate and have a level of success that could be replicated for a national magazine. So, let's break down the methods just a little bit more in order to help us draw implications for the future. First, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing and an ask for forgiveness. This is something that needs to be public and official. This is the awareness of one's sins. This is where you can go about and maybe have a form of confession, as Roland said. Secondly, we can offer a thorough change of attitude and relationship. This is where you look within, or look at policies put in place. For instance, maybe sending white writers over to African villages to cover that. Not quite the best move. Third, we need to take steps to develop different kinds of presents and futures. The wrongdoer must realize that good can come out of the wrongdoing, and that this good makes the whole process worthwhile and justified, as quoted by Joe Costin in the article. Now, the fourth step is to, through public action or private mortification, demonstrate the authenticity of this apology. You need to find a way that you can say, hey, we're truthfully going about this. This is not something that we're just saying. It's not a political move. So in this, Roland proposed something of a confession or having this authenticity seen through by God. Now, I do not believe that a God can necessarily analyze the effectiveness of atonement rhetoric, so in order to properly look at this, we're going to make a mental note to look more specifically at public action in this step. Doing the things actually necessary to institute it throughout the public. Now, finally, there must be an effort to seek atonement in a public forum or through public actions. It's important for the actions of this public informant to let everyone know that there were steps taken or reparations made to justify the atonement. Now, an importantly added tenet in the Costin and Roland article is the need for authenticity. If the atonement is not perceived to be authentic, it will be seen as empty verbiage. I'm sorry, Costin says. This means all of these actions must add up. You cannot simply do half of these steps or 3/4. You need to do them, and these need to all fulfill the previous requirement to build up to something important. Now, let's begin our analysis and really get into the nuts and bolts of this. So, to begin, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing and asking for forgiveness. Nat Geo hired a professor from the University of Virginia who specialized in not only the history of photography, but the history of African arts. So, these two, really interesting histories would combine to add a very good background for him to sift through National Geographic's previous past. His name, John Edwin Mason. So, after he started his digging, he ended up finding writing discrepancies that existed up until around the late 1970s. It had a vast portrayal in African citizens to their real-life existence. And this right here began Nat Geo's quote-unquote search within to try and fix how they portrayed people globally. Now, secondly, we want to offer a change of attitude and relationship to reporting. This is where Goldberg was quoted as saying she wanted future editors to be able to look back at their coverage with pride, and that they held a diverse group of writers, editors, and photographers. This was all taken directly from the National Geographic article. Now, the third step is taking these steps to develop a different kind of present and future. This is done at the expense of letting these cultures quite possibly photograph what they deem as culturally significant for themselves. For instance, in 2015, Nat Geo implemented these by giving Haitians cameras themselves, and they proceeded to take photographs of their reality. Sorry, I had to burp. Even Professor John Mason said that these photographs were, quote, really, really important and, quote, unthinkable at the time. This shows that there is a level of commitment to change. Now, fourth, through public action, demonstrate the authenticity of being able to support these actions. Chief editor Susan Goldberg has put this in action as she, quote, recently hired Deborah Adams Simmons, an African American woman, to be the magazine's culture editor. Along with this, she says that one of their goals is to feature diverse stories and diverse storytellers. Now, finally, the effort for atonement on a public forum. This was all put out in an April 2018 article, and this was their preamble. This is one of the first pages you open up to. They not only called out their own past, but they called out for every single one of us to really take a look within and see if maybe we're holding certain ideologies that can prevent us from really existing in the present and the future. Now, it appears that using good business techniques and being genuine about their desires to change has rang true in this situation. They followed atonement principles laid out by Costin and Rowland, and their desire to change is what I would say is one of the most important factors. They've truthfully changed their reporting styles and leadership positions to be more inclusive. This can range from the first female editor-in-chief to the first Jewish editor-in-chief, all the way to even incorporating the first African-American editor. Now, let's take a look and see if we can draw implications from all of this. Now, we can see two that pop out and appear to be incredibly prevalent right away. Number one, atonement works successfully. We wanted to gauge the effectiveness of atonement by analyzing Nat Geo's article with this. And it turns out that if you follow these, you might be able to get somewhere with atonement. More importantly, it appears that Nat Geo has. And this is where I offer the second implication that we can see here. The addition of physical changes reinforces a pillar that we can look upon. Nat Geo has become a literal figure in society for this. We can see that this large corporation has indeed done this, so we can as well. Our small businesses can. It's all about the effectiveness of the actions taken by the one doing the atonement. The scene that Nat Geo had changed to definitely leads one to believe that proper atonement strategies can take even the worst of situations and lead them to a more progressive and secure future. Lastly, I would say that this highlights the importance of taking guilt head on and believing in change. This isn't a real implication that I think we could measure, but this is a societal implication I think that we should all look at when we decide to swallow our pride and admit that we might have done something wrong. Now, to overall wrap this up in a conclusion, I want to say that today we looked at the power of atonement rhetoric, its effectiveness, and then we drew implications from all of that. This was done with a brief overview in the rhetorical situation brought up by Nat Geo. Then it was analyzed through an atonement rhetoric lens by Costin and Rowland. Before we lastly drew two implications by looking at its effectiveness and how it can impact society by leading an example to be followed by all. Now, I'm going to leave you with a quote by NPR's Elizabeth Blair. Times change, values change, institutions can be slow to catch up. Now, let's make sure that the institutions we are a part of help lead the way for the future. Thank you.